record. Okay, hello everybody. It is about week 5. I was figuring of sheltering in place or social distancing, staying at home in response to the coronavirus. I hope everyone who's listening is safe and healthy and doing well, and that you have figured out your new routine, the new normal. Anyway, I know that the news frequently is just kind of upsetting and unsettling, and I thought it might be interesting to talk to people in the community to get their story, their personal story about how they're adjusting, either personally or with their work environment. So my very first guest today is Stephanie Hirsch. Good morning,
Hey.
Stephanie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. Listen, Stephanie is my daughter. So, I fortunately was lucky to get her to agree to this interview. But I chose to talk to Stephanie first because most of you know that I got into politics in large part because of our family's commitment to public education. And Stephanie has a really unique background when it comes to our public schools. So, Steph, why don't you let us know what you've been up to career-wise so people understand what I'm talking about here.
Sure. So I grew up in the Plano school system and I graduated from Plano Senior High. And so after going to college and getting my teaching degree, I actually came back to Plano and taught high school math for over a decade at various high schools in the area. And then I decided it was ready for a change and I wanted to kind of look at another side of education. And so I moved over to education technology. And I am currently working as a content development manager on an ed tech company where we provide options for students across the country and even internationally to help support virtual and blended learning.
So very timely topic right now, virtual and blended learning. So probably one of the biggest disruptions as a result of coronavirus, and the things we saw closing first were our public schools. With the nation's population and the 5 million students, I think we have over 5 million students in Texas, suddenly going home and transitioning to this online distance learning. Tell me a little bit about how your job, how your work, how your company has changed or adapted to the new reality.
So almost overnight, virtual learning was definitely in demand. And so what we're doing now is we're really focusing on how do we get students and teachers into the programs and started learning quickly, easily, with the least amount of work required on the teacher's end. So we're looking at ways to get them to be able to log in and get learning so that all of the work is done behind the scenes and they don't have to worry about any of that. So this is everything from how to load new users into the program, as well as how we process the information and payments that they get, as well as just what libraries and support pieces are available to people at different levels. So really what we're doing is a lot of the back end work to make sure that everyone can get that access right away. And then once they get that access, we're really starting to rethink some of our training that we give. So we're going to need to, we've always done virtual trainings as an option, but now they're all virtual and we're working with a lot of teachers who haven't had the opportunity to gradually get familiar with the program or have a support system around them in the same room. So we are adapting our training and building up our training so that we have more options and more opportunities for teachers to get the training they need, as well as being really specific and making sure that we're giving them immediate actionable items that really help them get what they need. And it's also impacting the way we're thinking long term. So all of those initial actions are all very short term, getting people in the system, getting people using the system. But also as we look at, as we talk to teachers and you watch the news, it's clear that this is going to extend for years. Maybe we'll get back in the classroom, but the implications are going to be there for a long time. So the question is, how do we fill an immediate need now, and then also start thinking about how we can support more blended learning and non-traditional environments in a longer term plan, as well as just, supporting those gaps and finding ways to provide meaningful learning experiences and support teachers in providing those that aren't necessarily dependent on people being in one room together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you touched on a couple really critical things. One, it happened so fast. I mean, kids and teachers and families went on spring break, and now they're on, home for the rest of the school year. And we heard from the governor yesterday that the schools will be closed for the remainder of the academic year. And then also just this, how do we adapt? Your company, even though it was a delivered virtual learning, you had to make some big changes.
Right.
So speaking of big changes, you were a classroom teacher. So as a former teacher, address the differences between what it's like to deliver that content in your school building versus at home.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest hurdle for us in this time right now. There is nothing that can replace a personal interaction. Teachers are in the business because they care about the students. They want to be there with the students, helping the students in those, immediate needs. So a Zoom tutorial will never be the same as sitting side by side and working through a problem. And it's also changing the engagement factor. So I know as a teacher in the classroom, I really relied on nonverbal communication to help me understand
Mm-hmm.
what my students were thinking and feeling, and then also share with them what I'm thinking and feeling. So as a teacher, you can often tell who has a question or who is moving ahead or who isn't paying attention at all just by looking around the room or seeing what's happening before you, and then you can take immediate action. So when we're learning asynchronously and doing this virtual teaching, it's really hard to figure out how to get that on-demand feedback to students who really, really need it. It's also a little bit difficult to figure out how to promote communication and collaboration. So how do we get kids to work together when they can't be together? Because that is also a place where they can get that feedback that's desperately needed to help them understand where they're at and where they're growing. So it's hard to be able to do those in the moment questions, expand upon aha moments, and really meet what they need at that particular moment. I think you also see a little bit of an issue with when students are on a device, they're different. We're all different people when we're on our device versus when we're talking to someone in person. And so, we really have to think about what we're asking students to do, what tools we're giving them, and then also kind of what support and resources we're giving them, not just here's a website or here's a tool, but also strategies for how to make virtual learning work for them. It took a long time for kids at a one-to-one school I worked at to realize that sometimes they just needed to pull out a piece of paper. That was the simplest thing to do rather than trying to multitask on all their different screens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I always say, one of the first assessments teachers make in the morning is when the child walks through the door, and you can tell if they're tired, you can tell if they're prepared, you can tell if they've, had a bad start to the day or whatever, and that you can make those adjustments just by seeing them. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I wondered if you think that education is going to change long term as a result, and if you see this distance learning as someday replacing our brick and mortar schools.
Yeah, definitely yes to the first part of that question. So will education change long term? Absolutely. It can't not change long term. With more and more districts moving to these fully virtual solutions, they're going to start discovering a lot of perks that come along with some of these virtual solutions. So we provide reports for where students are at, as well as a variety of learning experiences, just a lot of resources available to teachers. And it's hard to give those up when you move back into the traditional classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that in the future, I don't know that we're going to transition directly to fully virtual, but I do see a lot more blended learning happening. And these experiences sort of allow us to see places where traditional learning has overlooked opportunities to promote differentiation and provide a variety of learning experiences for students. So I really do think we're going to see a lot more of that blended learning. I think this is also giving us an opportunity to rethink what we're teaching and what the goals of the teaching are, because right now we're having students who are, alone or with their parents at their home, and they're having to learn how to self-manage. They're having to learn how to schedule themselves, how to monitor their feelings when the teacher isn't there to watch and see and help them with that. They're also having to seek a lot of resources out on their own. And kids are really good at seeking out resources when it comes to, how do I use this new Snapchat filter, or let's look at this contouring video on YouTube. But they have a hard time doing it academically. So we really need to think about how our priorities are aligned in the classroom. A lot of it is based on those academics, but these soft skills, these self-management skills that these students are having to learn on the fly right now, are actually important things that we should be including in our traditional learning environments as well. I think about the bumper sticker that I see that says, "My student is a self-manager at whatever elementary school." And I think that we really need to own that at all levels of education and really start thinking about, what these students' futures are going to be like, as well as just prepping them for whatever is going to come our way, since clearly we never know. But for the second part of the question, will virtual learning ever replace traditional schools? Absolutely not. But I do think virtual learning can enhance what's happening in the traditional classroom. So I alluded to blended learning earlier. And I think it also opens up more avenues for us to reach all types of learners in all types of situations, whether they're homebound or we're looking at a classroom with kids at different levels and needing to provide different levels experiences. Virtual learning can really help with that. I think we're also going to see districts who've started a partnership with a online learning company continue that partnership, even if they aren't actively using it on a daily basis, because we're going to need to start seeing contingency plans for districts across the country. I know a lot of northern districts have plans for distance learning when the weather is bad and they're going to be, stuck at home in the snowstorm for weeks. And now I think that we're going to see all districts have those types of plans as well, which means solidifying those partnerships with the online providers.
Oh, I didn't think about that with the northern districts and the snow. But you brought up two things that I think are so critical, is this term blended learning. Just acknowledging that this is part of the experience. It's not going to take over the experience, but how can we use it to make it better? And the term opportunity, because out of every crisis, out of every bad thing that happens, we have an opportunity to create new solutions. And and I think that that's one of the good things that'll come out of all of this. The other concern, or another concern for me, is how families deal with this, because we even know in our own family, having my daughter-in-law, your sister-in-law, teaching from home, also having a first grader, also having a 3-year-old, and managing all of that. What kind of resources or help can we give families as they navigate through this kind of new normal? And I think, now that we know that the governor is going to kind of relax some of the going back to work rules, we're going to see parents maybe going back to work and kids being at home by themselves. So what can we do to support families?
Right. Yeah. It's difficult, like you said. We're asking parents to be parents and teachers at the same time, and so we really have to be patient with them. That's the teachers. We're the experts. We know how to do this, and parents, they're really going to need a lot of support and patience. And it's going to be trying, because sometimes that doesn't get reciprocated all the time. Exactly. But this is new and it's intimidating for a lot of parents, and it's pushing them outside of their comfort zone. The traditional parent-child relationship is very much different from the student-teacher relationship, and so we're going to have to think about how we can help those parents shift their mindset. So when we're in school mode, and when we're in home mode. And that's going to be really difficult for a lot of families because, we have a lot of parents who maybe want to be there supporting their kids but can't because they're essential
Right.
workers, or they are at home as well but also have a full-time job where they are not being able to monitor their students constantly. And so that's really going to be, it puts a big burden on the teachers, but also, we really need to think about how do we support those parents so
Mhm.
that we aren't fully dependent on the parents to do everything for those students so that they can balance and not be too stressed, and that does create a good environment for the students to be in.
Mhm.
um, so that could involve providing sample schedules for parents, giving them plenty of resources, as well as being really intentional about contact opportunities. So
Mhm.
talking to these parents, giving them a call, sending them emails, whether it's good or bad, we need to be even more vigilant about that than we ever have been before.
Right.
And I think this is some place where the districts are going to have to really step into support, and even the state level can really step in to support teachers. We have, most students or most teachers have, you know, 100, over 100 students if they're at a secondary level, and that's a
Mhm.
lot of people to have to call. So how can we support them in those contact
Right.
opportunities to make sure parents are really aware of what's happening, and just making sure that we're asking the right things of students. So overloading a student is unintentionally, or is overloading a parent. So
Mhm.
we need to make sure we're asking them to do the right things for the right reasons.
Mhm.
And also, if it's not necessary, maybe it doesn't need to be done. Maybe we can ask them to do something else instead that gives them an opportunity to show off with their parents, share with their parents, have a experience that's going to support their social emotional learning in addition to their academic learning.
Mhm.
Um, and to encourage those relationships a little bit more, because we can take this as a positive. We're engaging parents who may not have ever been engaged in education before just
Right.
because they're forced to. It's in front
Exactly.
of them, and it also gives us a little more transparency, right? This is what we're
Mhm.
learning, this is how we're doing it, and
Mhm.
hopefully the increased engagement carries forward to whatever the next stage looks like as well.
Right. Well, I know we've seen a renewed appreciation for the work that educators do as
Right, right.
our LHC teachers. I can't imagine us, when all of you and your three brothers were little and your dad was a teacher, how we would have managed it. It would have been a bit chaotic. But I want to ask you a little bit about the feedback loop and how that works with the virtual
Mhm.
learning, because I know you can give these assessment reports and things, so you can talk about that a little bit. But how do you do that constant feedback, like at the academy, when you were at the academy, where
Mhm.
that was the main way you could tell how kids were doing? So talk about that a little bit.
Right, right. As we transition into these virtual environments, online learning, at least established companies are really good at checking those boxes there. So we have everything tagged, items, lessons, resources. They're all tagged to standards, so you can get a report to show which students checked off which standards, or we can add up the score, divide by how many questions there were, and give you that cumulative number for students. All of that is very quick and easy to do automatically when you're using these online learning environments. But what that doesn't do is give any meaningful feedback to students, right?
Okay.
So that's going to be a trickier issue, and one that, again, like we said earlier, is going to require teacher action.
Mhm.
There are some great ways that you can use messaging within some of these programs, and adding comments to things students submit. I know there's a lot of work on Google Classroom. Google is great for adding comments and putting in bits of feedback that way. But that only gets us so far.
Right.
That feedback is, someone has to read it, internalize it, and use it there. And not all of that always gets through. So it's really going to be important for teachers to find ways to engage with their students one-on-one, whether it's a video call or other ways to be able to give them that verbal feedback and get the feedback going both ways. just telling a student what they did wrong doesn't always solve the problem. That
Mhm.
response is really helpful for the teachers as well, so that we can figure out what we need to do. And again, this is a place where we can get administration and district support to provide some more support pieces to help us keep this communication loop going. Sometimes they might have some options that individual teachers might not have thought of, to make sure that we're enhancing that back and forth and making sure that every student feels like they're being seen.
Mhm.
This is something that we're working on all in the ed tech industry as well, because we know that, feedback can be more meaningful than a number or a checkbox.
Mhm.
Those things that are very easy to code, right?
Right.
This is something we're all looking at. How can we change our product so that we use the choice or response the student gives to give specific feedback about what they did right or wrong, and then push them to the next place they need to go, whether that's an advancement or whether that's a remediation piece. And we're all working on that and developing those pieces, and every bit by bit we're getting there. But it's, authentic, actionable feedback is something that I think we'll see fall off at the beginning of this virtual learning experience. But as teachers get more comfortable with the products that they're using, and students get more comfortable reaching out in a different way, I think that we'll start moving in the right direction. Though this is definitely one of the most critical things we need to figure out.
Yeah, I think for me too, like moving your cheese. There was that book long time ago about moving your cheese. It's been hard for me to transition into that virtual world too. Um, One of the concerns that I've had are the challenges that families with several children and at different levels, and they can't all be on the device at the same time. Connectivity issues. Maybe speak to that for just a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been working with a scholarship group where the students are in college, but a lot of them are now having to work back at home. And at home means also at home with all of their siblings. So at home doesn't mean quite the same thing as you think it would when you're also having to do a full load of classes. So we really need to kind of, this is going to be where we have to be really thoughtful about what everybody's experience is. And again, it comes back to, what are we asking students to do, and are we aware of what those other issues are? So kind of one thing we can do is think about those older brothers and sisters. Yes, they can be supports, but they also might have to be babysitting or parenting for their younger siblings. So we need to check in with those students, in addition to the younger students too, to say, hey, where are you at? What do you need? And what can I do to help you get that? And sometimes that's pointing them in the direction of some district resources that are more about what they need to survive. And sometimes it's just pointing them in help or making accommodations for what it is that they need to do academically to get through that.
Right.
And everyone being online at the same time is taxing. I mean, we see that even when we're, someone's watching Netflix on this device and this device and this device. Now, if we're all constantly on, that's taxing to our connection. So we really have to work on ways to add blended type learning experiences to our fully virtual learning.
Mhm.
And so I know that I've seen a lot of teachers thinking creatively about how they might ask a student to do an art project that allows them to go outside, take a picture, and submit. So there's a lot of not online time.
Mhm.
You can think about going out and gathering data. That's something that we like to use in our math experiences.
Mhm.
Or, also embracing the fact that these families are together. Maybe it is asking them to interview someone else or participate in some sort of conversation. With whoever is around them in the house, and that gets them offline for a little while, as well as encourages them just to have a conversation about something that's not the stressful situation that we're in
Mhm.
right now. And really, just finding ways to have meaningful engagement between the people who are stuck together just makes all of the experience better, and can really, again, provide some, open transparency between what everybody is working on, and hopefully, forge a little bit stronger relationships in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you used the word accommodation, so that kind of leads into this next question, which could be an hour conversation, but we'll have to keep it to 5 minutes. But I sat in on a conversation between the governor's committee for people with disabilities, I think that's the name of it, and TEA and HHSC, the Health and Human Services Commission. And how do you address students with special needs and that
Right.
students that need accommodations through virtual learning?
Right. So, there are a lot of different resources out there. If you were to search for any particular learning need, you could find someone out there who's offering a one-stop shop for it. But the issue is really going to be about properly curating what you're using. Oftentimes in these situations, we throw all the possible resources at it because we can't be there to help in the
Mm-hmm.
moment, and more isn't necessarily better in this environment. So, the recommendation is to reach out to district coordinators and fellow teachers for recommendations that they have to, what are you using with your teachers who have special needs or need different accommodations there, and pick a couple and stick with them, because then what it is, the students know what it is, and having less variance just really helps in these particular situations. There's also a lot of PLCs, professional learning communities out there that you can get some support for, as well as suggestions for resources. And so really, ultimately though, in this virtual environment, it's a prime opportunity for us to provide accommodations, because we aren't all in the same classroom, where there is a little bit of a pressure to make sure that, it's much easier to have everyone doing the same thing at the same time. And now that we are doing this asynchronous learning, there's a little bit more leeway for deciding, does this student need to do this particular activity, or how can I adjust this activity to better meet the needs of this other student. And so I think that we are actually starting to see a little bit more in terms of the accommodations for different students with different needs. And again, it's about partnering with those parents of those students as well, depending on the particular need. There may need to be parent intervention as well, just keeping that communication open, knowing what the students are thinking, feeling, and really just knowing the results of what you're doing to make sure that you can adapt. And I know that at a higher level, districts have been working really hard to solve the problems of devices and connections and making sure everybody has what they need. And I think they're also thinking about these other accommodations that we need to be providing to students with those special needs, because we need to make sure that we are giving them the same education level they would have gotten in the classroom as well. And so sometimes it is going to be reaching out to those, as teachers, needing to reach out to some of those district support pieces as well, and not attempting to do everything all on your own.
Mm-hmm.
We spoke of my sister-in-law earlier. I know she's been working with her partner teacher and figuring out,
Mm-hmm.
I have 130 students and you have 130 students, but maybe we can do sharing the load of the work, and I'll do an accommodated activity and you can do the other one, and we can share crossways. And so really building those partnerships is going to help you reach more students in the end as well.
Right. Yeah, I had a couple more questions, but I think I'm going to do this, revisit this, because we were going to talk a little bit about what's going to happen next. And I think we're probably at a stage now where there's still so much uncertainty that we don't know. We know we're going to have to address this legislatively. We know there's going to be a concern about finances with public schools. And I know that you have mentioned this before, that kids are going to need even more resources, to try to get back up to speed. So we need to make sure that we keep public education a priority. And as you said, look for those opportunities so that we don't get caught in a situation where we're responding to a crisis without a plan in place. So I think it gives us a great opportunity to plan. But the last thing I wanted to talk to you about before we sign off is you had mentioned your work with Hendrick Scholarship Foundation, and I'm going to give a little shout out to that because I serve on the board of the Scholarship Foundation. They've been around for many, many years. And what we do is we provide scholarships for kids or Plano ISD students who have overcome adversity. And in addition to that, we provide them with resources, tutoring, and mentoring. And so take just a minute to, I know you're really busy with your work, but let everyone know what you're doing for Hendrick Scholarship Foundation.
Yeah, so I just recently joined in with the group, and I'm working with the engineering students and coaches, and working to help create a little network so that these students and coaches can support each other. All of them are in engineering programs in my particular group, are in engineering programs at colleges throughout the state, most of them locally, but there are some in Austin and up north a little ways too. And so what we're looking to do is just figure out ways that we can provide support for these students in terms of just support with their academics, like you mentioned, tutoring, as well as support in just making it to the next step. Figuring out what does it look like to rent an apartment? What does it look like to, fill out this particular form, meet these particular needs, and really just helping these students navigate this weird world of the finance and everything. A lot of them are working full time, so having someone to open up with and talk to is really important, and that's where that coaching piece comes in too. Right now we're having to figure out how to deal with it virtually. The Student Success Committee meets virtually now, but we're also have actually increased the number of opportunities we've had for students to get together because in some ways it's easier for them to log on to a call than drive 40 minutes out of their way to try to go somewhere. So we've been trying to provide a lot of workshops for them that are everything from goal setting to how to work in a virtual environment, to I know there's one today too for some of our healthcare students and helping them think about how they transition into their next step. Especially those that are graduating soon are definitely in high demand. So
exactly. Yeah, I think now more than ever that additional assistance and kind of steering them along that path is super important. So I wanted to say thank you to you for joining the team and helping the students out that way too. So I hope everyone who has taken the time to listen to get to this far in the interview have enjoyed the conversation. And I just wanted to let everybody know that I'm going to reach out to more members of the community to see how they are adapting and adjusting to this new normal, which is changing every day. And I want to thank you, Stephanie, for taking time out of your busy day. I know you have a lot of things going on. Hopefully you'll be taking time out to bake some cookies, and that again we will be the recipients of all your good I'm sure your coworkers are missing it. So
they are.
Everyone has a good day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay tuned for more conversations from the community. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Thanks.